Hello, everyone. I'm Puba Ganeshan, Principal Scientist with the Food Center, and I'm happy to be back as your host for today's webinar. It's great to have you with us today for the first session of 2024 and the fourth installment of our GreenPrints webinar series. Today, we are venturing into the future with Cultivating Tomorrow 2024's Sustainable Agri-Food Trends in Canada. Joining us again is the renowned Dr. Sylvain Charlebois, the food professor, to provide expert insight into the key trends shaping our industry this year. Please make sure to take advantage of this opportunity to connect with Dr. Charlebois during the Q&A sessions. But before we delve into the webinar, a big thank you to our partner, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, for the unwavering support of the GreenPrints series. And also, please remember to type in your Q&A questions in the Q&A feature to submit your questions. Without further delay, let's cultivate a sustainable future together. And let's hear Sylvain for his webinar. Sylvain, it's to you.
Well, thank you, Puba, and Happy New Year to you, to your team, and to all of you listening in today. I'm happy to be back. This is our fourth webinar. The overarching theme is sustainability, but obviously it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. In fact, while preparing these webinars, um, I've come to the conclusion that at some point we'll stop talking about sustainability, and we'll start talking more about sound business practices overall. If you go to different places around the world, they don't talk about sustainability. Environmental stewardship is very much part of doing business, essentially, and so I actually do think that the lexicon will change, will evolve over time, especially in the ag space. Uh, and I think if you're listening in, you probably are in the agri-food sector, and often I feel that that farmers and even the sector from farm gate to store or restaurants, the industry is actually not very well understood, and a lot of people don't appreciate what is being done right now to take care of the environment overall, and which actually fosters this rural urban divide that we see, which often leads to bad policy. Let's face it. I mean, at the end of the day, it's about understanding. It's about appreciating. And so for this fourth installment, what I thought of doing was to bring uh, more of my own experience as a mentor of startups. I am a professor. I do research, of course. I publish, and I teach, of course, at Dalhousie University and different places around the world. But I do mentor startups, and I learn a whole lot when I interact with startups. I learn about, well, first of all, I'm energized and inspired by entrepreneurs always, but two, I've always believed that if you follow the money, you will eventually understand what lies ahead, and that's why I think today's seminar, you could actually call it sustainability, follow the money. And in today's webinar, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be presenting, I would say, themes, axes, where I think investors are investing. I mean, that's where people are looking right now. There's been some tremendous progress over the last few years uh, on environmental stewardship from farm gate to plate, and I'll be covering the entire gamut here, not just farming, but I'll be looking at farming, transportation, processing, retailing, warehousing, everything today, from farm gate to plate, because I think it's important to appreciate the immense evolution, technological evolution that we have seen. And I'll present to you today actual cases, examples of some of the things that are happening right now in the industry that you may or may not know about. Of course, uh, we'll talk about Canada mostly, but some examples come out of the US. But as you can imagine, eventually what goes on in the US will influence Canada over time. And so that's my plan for today. I hope you enjoy the ride. I think it's going to be pretty interesting. And then, of course, as Puba mentioned, if you have any questions at all, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you have at this point. I'm going to see if I can move ahead here. Okay, here we go. So you know who I am. And by the way, if you want any information about the work that we do at the lab, you can always go on Google Agri-Food Analytics Lab at Dalhousie University. All of our reports are free in both English and French, and my email is also there, so you can contact me afterwards. And a lot of people over the last several months have actually contacted me after webinars to talk more about what's going on. And I mean, things are complicated, and frankly, it's been quite interesting, but also things are changing very quickly, so it's hard for people to keep up. So for today's webinar, basically I wanted to focus more on trends from farm gate to table. Why? Because, well, to me it's important to put things into perspective, to look at all elements of a food industry, of the food industry, basically, to make sure that we understand where we fit in. And one, of course, element will affect the other. But there's been some really important announcements over the last several months that have happened in Canada, actually, that will actually have an impact over time uh, on sustainability. Excuse me. Geez, some dust here. Sorry. There's been some progress on the policy side that will actually influence farming, distribution, and things like that. And of course, on the investment side, we've seen companies reinvesting. Just for example, yesterday there was an announcement made by Loblaws buying 10 electric trucks. So you can see that really the grid is adapting when it comes to food distribution overall. So quite interesting. All right, so from farm to table. So the first aspect, the first area that I see some progress. Sorry, as you can tell, I'm finding a cold, but I'm on my own here in my studio, so I don't have to contaminate anybody. So I'm safe here, and you're safe there. But anyway, sorry if I sneeze and I sniffle once in a while. I apologize. But the one area where I'm seeing a lot of movement right now when it comes to investments is gene editing and biotechnology evolution. By far, a very exciting field, and of course, that was certainly triggered by Ottawa's approval of, you guessed it, gene editing. And gene editing is, to me, an exciting field, um, but it's also a misunderstood field. A lot of people, back in the 90s, I think genetic engineering really didn't have some good press, and made a lot of people concerned. And I'm hoping that with gene editing, we can actually do a better job basically explaining to people what it is. So the webinar today is not necessarily just about that. We can talk about it for sure, perceptions, but overall, I actually think that the CRISPR technology is so promising, and I actually outlined a couple of examples here of ways that the entire supply chain, even consumers themselves, can actually be empowered by CRISPR and by gene editing. For example, when you think about space grapes, with gene editing, you can actually create grapes that will grow close together to save space as much as possible, instead of seeing grapes, and you've seen that at the grocery store, grapes that can actually take a lot of volume, a lot of space. but with grapes, you can actually grow much faster, quicker, more efficiently. It will take less space as well. So those are interesting things. So, and to me, space is going to be a big deal, especially with the will to bring more agriculture closer to cities. You have to think about space more strategically when it comes to growing produce in general. And I actually visited a few months ago in Guelph, um, Goodleaf, which is a facility where they grow microgreens and lettuce. And I mean, it's all about space. It's all about efficiency. It's all about space. Every minute counts, and it's just incredible. And my guess is that with gene editing, we're going to see more of that movement impacting our agricultural capacity in Canada, which is really exciting when you think about it. It really redefined exactly how we grow things and where we grow things as well, and how these products being distributed across the supply chain, the shelf life of these products at retail. There's been a lot of complaints recently around shelflation, which means that the shelf life of products is compromised by supply chain challenges. But with gene editing, all of a sudden, you can actually do all sorts of things to actually improve the quality of products and make them more desirable over an extended period of time for consumers in the end. So these are all wins as far as I'm concerned. Another example with gene editing, it could actually decrease the growing time. You can actually adapt some plants so it can grow indoors in people's homes. And so this is the other thing that is quite exciting, is that the farmer, we have farmers, but the new farmer is not just someone managing fields. You can actually have urban farmers. You can actually have residential farmers that will grow food for themselves. So things are really evolving because of gene editing. And my guess is that we're going to see different crops making agriculture more efficient. Now, uh, when it comes to sustainability, you got to think, well, what about the resources required? But obviously, when you think about all of these things, you can think of how you can impact um, water demand, how you can impact the space required, the soil required, all of these things. So all of these new technologies could require fewer resources overall. So what I'm seeing right now are several startups looking at different crops, and I'm not going to tell you which crop, but in Canada, especially out west, there are a lot of different companies investing or attracting some attention that are using gene editing. And because of the approval, of course, there's more momentum in that regards. And frankly, the more we do that, the more we stabilize food prices, the more we actually make different nations, including Canada, food secure, essentially. So quite exciting to see. Anyways, as you can tell, I'm a big fan of gene editing for a variety of reasons. But if you're not, or if you're concerned, it's quite normal because there's baggage, and of course, gene editing is about tweaking the DNA of plants. It's not about changing or crossing different uh, genes to create a new variety or trait. It's very different than genetic engineering. Um, because of the fact that we didn't do a good job selling genetic engineering to the public. That's why I think gene editing, and I'm expecting gene editing to become an issue politically, publicly over the next little while as we actually try to figure things out. And of course, it will boil down to the inputs that all of the portfolio of ingredients of products that farmers would need to grow some of these things. And so I do hope that over time we'll actually make a case for gene editing to the public, not just to farmers, but to the public. And right now, I'm kind of seeing the same approach as with genetic engineering, which I don't think was a good idea, is a good idea. So hopefully we'll see more communications made towards the public to reassure the public in terms of what's actually is going on with agriculture, not only in Canada, but around the world. So that's one area where I see a lot of investment. Now, another area I find quite interesting is the digitalization of farming. So farming is not what it used to be at all, and frankly, things are changing so rapidly. It's hard to keep up. And I mean, the modern farmer will have a laptop, will use computers, will actually will monitor progress almost every single minute, whether it's remotely or in situ. And of course, it's all about efficiency and increasing yields. One example that I found that is being utilized in Canada, which actually makes agriculture way more sustainable, is how farmers are actually using automated tractors, and some of them actually will drive more than one tractor. In one case, I know that a farmer many miles away drives actually 3 to 4 tractors at the same time. Can you imagine? It's like, talk about efficiency. So you'd have to stop, you don't have to idle. I mean, think of the diesel requirement, think of all the things that you have to do to accommodate the needs of a human. You don't have to think about that anymore. It's all about the machinery, it's all about efficiency. And it's quite interesting. And of course, just on the slide here, you do have a map just down here with lines showing you exactly where the tractor actually is going to actually not cover the same space twice. And we're talking centimeters square here. So this is how efficient, and you can save a lot of energy. And the future is about energy management. And farmers are really jumping on this bandwagon more and more. You go to tech shows, I mean, farmers know that this is the future, and they're actually investing heavily in this. And more farmers have the capacity to invest in these technologies. And it's just been amazing to watch. And I do see more progress in this area. And of course, the use of satellites, the use of GPS, the use of different technologies, it would only evolve. And of course, the issue of drones and sampling, that will continue as well. My guess is that a lot of people just don't know what's going on, and frankly, it's important to showcase this as much as possible, to demystify what agriculture is as much as possible, so people can appreciate all the investment instead of going to the grocery store and complain that prices are too high constantly. Of course, prices are high, but at the same time, you also want to appreciate all the work being done right now across the industry, starting with farming. And farmers are absolutely just investing heavily. What's been challenging is the middle, is right in the middle. There's been some struggles there. So farmers have invested heavily, have embraced AI, and we talked about AI the last time we spoke. We met together, and of course, we talked about the focus on the future and on forecasting and things like that. So there's been a lot of movement in farming, lots of movement in retail, but in the middle, it's been a struggle. But things are changing for the better. And so just to give you a quick class of supply chain management. So in supply chain management, you have farm gate, okay? You have, of course, processing, and then you have the middle mile, and then the last mile, and of course, retail, okay? The last mile, there's been a lot of attention given to the last mile. The last mile is very much about connecting the point of sale to the customer. So, and Amazon is by far the benchmark for servicing the market by and making the last mile quite efficient. The last mile is the most expensive one. It's hard to cover. It's hard to become efficient at it. Grocers are trying. Voila, for example, from Sobeys. Instacart has actually tried to do that, but it's hard. It's hard to actually create a competitive advantage looking at the last mile. And I think a lot of companies actually would see that. But what has happened over the last, I'd say, 3 to 5 years, especially in Canada, is this investment towards the middle mile. And the middle mile is between processing and servicing stores. So that's the part that people don't see, consumers don't see. And we've seen way more investments. Now, you see in front of you a picture of Metro's distribution center in Montreal, which I'm actually scheduled to visit at some point. It actually is going to be opening officially next month in February. And that's, I believe it costs $700 or $800 million to build. It's a massive distribution center, and it will service 700 different stores in Quebec. Loblaws is also building a 1.2 million square feet facility. I believe it's in Newmarket, and you're seeing, and of course, Sobeys has actually made some investments as well. Walmart actually was supposed to invest, but they decided to pause on some investments. But I think there is this recognition that it's important to invest in the middle mile as much as possible. Why, you may ask? Well, it's pretty simple. It's to save on energy, increase efficiencies, and on execution. And the more you do that, the more you save, the more you become sustainable, of course. And so you see some of the pictures here will show the how modern some of the facilities are. It's pretty impressive. I've actually visited a few of them. Over the last few years, some of them are actually quite depressing, to be honest, but more and more there is this recognition to make the supply chain more efficient, and those investments will actually help a great deal. I also added a picture of crates, and this is a bit of a pet peeve. And as you know, if you're in the business, you probably would know that that wooden crates are dominating the market right now. There are basically just a few players in the world that do manufacture them, and they dominate the market. But I actually do think that at some point things are going to change because of our willingness to adopt more environmentally friendly practices. It's actually quite bizarre that in 2024 we still rely on wooden crates to move products around, and I do get all the issues around weight and everything like that, but there are new technologies out there allowing companies to use different types of crates that are more sustainable, that use recyclable material, that are lighter as well. They can actually empower companies to trace and track products more efficiently as well. There are companies in Canada. I actually met one of them in Ontario a few months ago, and they're making some inroads. Why? Because companies are recognizing that, wooden crates, they break. It's an issue with pathogens as well. There are other ways to do this essentially, and so that's why there is an appetite to make changes using wooden crates, which is interesting. Absolutely, and by these investments, more changes are going to happen when it comes to some of these things that we've taken for granted, that we think, well, this is actually here to stay, but they actually are going to change. And I have something else for you later in this presentation that will actually kind of shift your paradigms a little bit. And I want you to think about the future when it comes to the consumer and sustainability as well. This is another theme. This is the third. I would say this is the fourth theme that I'm seeing right now when it comes to investments. Robotics. Absolutely, this is something that is attracting a lot of investors' attention. I actually picked up a video off YouTube that I thought was fascinating. It's actually a couple of months old, and I actually do think that this actually is a very good example of some of the things that are happening right now. COVID got a lot of companies to think about, the human aspect of food processing, and what we're noticing is that more and more companies are actually looking at automating, at using robotics in facilities. So it's a 2-minute video here. It's not too long. It's instrumental. There's no voice, but I just wanted to show you exactly what's possible, what's been happening in some of the sectors. And this is obviously a manufacturer, a meat processor. And if you have ever visited a meat plant, it's always a bit archaic, especially in Canada. But when you actually look at some of the things that are happening, it's pretty incredible. Now, this footage is not in Canada, but my guess is that in a few years from now, we're going to see some facilities actually do exactly that. There's no human. Everything is actually handled by machine. So when you think of food safety, when you think of bio risks, biosecurity risk, when you think of seals, imperfections, things like that. I mean, you do minimize risk as much as possible. You can customize your product depending of your customer as well, which is really exciting. And things can actually be shifted from one day to another. If, for example, the cost of a meat product increases or a cut increases, you can actually adapt your line accordingly very quickly. And so this is, you don't see any humans at all. I know some people may be concerned about that, but at the end of the day, uh, in light of some of the recalls we've seen recently around salmonella, uh, this is certainly something that companies will continue to consider to minimize risk as much as possible. So really, of course, when you look at some of the things that are going on with machinery, you have to think about capital, and capital is certainly a big issue right now. With the startups that I'm mentoring, is that capital is absolutely difficult to have access to, and frankly, capital is can be uh, gotten if you prove that you have some revenue. So very difficult. But overall, this is just one example of some of the things that we're expecting in the future, and there'll be more of that in Canada. So, well, let me see. So the other thing, augmented human kinetics. This is another issue that comes up a lot in our talks with entrepreneurs. So people are getting older. Uh, People don't necessarily focus on physical labor as much as they used to. You know this. I mean, people go to the gym, but a lot of people aren't physically active, and this is something that I'm seeing more and more. So how do you run a warehouse? How do you actually do all sorts of things with material, knowing that hiring people that are willing to move stuff around is not going to be that easy? And so augmenting human kinetic is actually another aspect that we see. And of course, it boils down to moving things faster, more safely, taking care of people, which is certainly something that should be prioritized. There's a lot of focus on salaries these days, working conditions as well. So all of these things are really coming fast, and companies have to react. And we are seeing more and more companies focusing on investing on some of these issues in the future. Transportation and logistics. You know this, it's been an issue. We saw the St. Lawrence Seaway go on strike. Ports in BC were on strike. Last year, railways were on strike. I mean, conditions are absolutely critical, and logistics are really important. This is one area where we need a lot of investment. So, and of course, it can be done without governments. And if you look at ports, if you look at roads, if you look at railways, Canada is just not there at all. And this is the struggle to me when you actually see railways operate the way they operate right now with disasters every 6 months or so. You hear a derailment story somewhere, and the effects on the environment and things like that is just not helping at all. Uh, One of the worst ports in the world, Vancouver, number 347 out of 348. One of the worst ports in the world. Not efficient. Lots of vessels out there. Lots of delays. Um, Companies are not interested in burning fuel while waiting to be unloaded or to be loaded, and so I think this is one area where we need more investment, but we need some leadership from governments as well. And frankly, it's something that is not talked about a whole lot. It's kind of invisible, if you will, but it shouldn't be invisible. It should be, in my view, a focus for the future in order to grow our agri-food business. And of course, it's big wins from a sustainability perspective can actually be gained by investing more in transportation and logistics. And I do travel to the U.S. once in a while, and the stories, the things I hear in the U.S. about Canada's reputation about around logistics is just not good at all, unfortunately. And so I'm hoping that things will eventually change over time. Those are some examples of things that we do see that can actually help: greener refrigerated transport, more sustainable reefer trucks, greener energy, reducing waste. So there is some focus on units, on trucks, not on infrastructure, unfortunately. But when it comes to trucks, and the Loblaw announcement yesterday is a good example of that. Toronto-based steer involved into diversified EV transportation innovator. We're going to see more of that being announced in the future as well, which is always a good thing. AI and resource efficiency and food waste. We talked about that during webinar number 3. I'm not going to go back to that material, but AI, we've been talking more and more about AI. I'm sure over the holidays you talk a lot about AI with your family and friends. It's not going to go away. It's absolutely going to be continuing, and it's all going to be about empowering agriculture, agri-food. It's about forecasting. It's about understanding. It's about measuring. And the more we do that, the more we'll be able to better understand how to make things more efficient. So we've been using AI for 15 years as a lab, and we're big believers. We've seen it's easy to fall in love with AI, but it's also easy to recognize that we can't replace humans either. AI is not there to replace humans. It's there to accommodate and support humans as much as possible. Demand chain management is a concept. Actually, I published about demand chain management. I think it was about 20 years ago, and in those days, nobody was talking about this, and I felt it was the future in those days, about 20 years ago. And today, you're seeing it. With social media, there's more power given to consumers. Consumers are able to tell the industry what they're expecting, and now it's all about looking at the market and structuring the industry as a result. And as we focus more on the environment, on different markets, I actually do think that over time, demand chain management will become more important. In agriculture, you know this, it's always been about supply side economics. We grow, we deliver, and people eat. It's not like that anymore. So over the last, I'd say 15, 20 years, there's been a shift of power. That power has been given more to consumers. The problem with consumers is that they don't know much about the industry. They don't know how it works. So they'll desire things that can be or cannot be possible. And over the last couple of years, I've seen some of the lack of knowledge has really hurt the industry, and that's something that we have to do a little bit better, in my view, on the perceptual side. But from an execution side of things, more and more, I actually think that companies are going to be focused more on demand chain management. So understanding demand and then work your way back and basically grow what you think the market will need now, in a week from now, in a month from now, in a year from now, and so on and so forth. It's completely being reversed right now. And if, as a company, if you don't see that, that's a problem. And that's why there's a lot of tension between players in the supply chain, between processors and grocers, for example. Grocers have data. They understand where the future is going. And of course, they go back and say, we need to do this and that. And there's some disagreement and tension. And that's certainly not helping at all right now when it comes to uh, vertical vertical coordination, essentially, to manage some of these shifts. So the pros basically improve customer satisfaction, efficient inventory management, just in time, just in case, enhance forecasting, optimize resource allocation. Those are key areas when it comes to sustainability. The cons, complexity, initial costs, of course, because the shift actually is just completely different. You kind of have to just think differently about the market overall. And that's why, for example, with vertical farms, like Goodleaf, for example, I mean, they can actually grow microgreens in 14 days. I mean, 14 days. So can you imagine? It's not like 40 days or 60 days. So in 14 days, you can actually pivot and make changes very rapidly. You need data, of course, resistance to change and integration challenges are really key in terms of demand chain management. One paradigm shift that I'd like to share with you, and this is something that is being discussed right now in different fields, and not just in agriculture and agri-food, it's basically in the economy overall. A few years ago, there was this movement towards homes without kitchens. And and in those days, about 5, 6 years ago, before COVID, of course, it was because of real estate costs. It was because of the space that was becoming very costly. Well, things have gotten worse. But the other thing, of course, is around energy. I mean, if you actually think about it, um, the one apartment in a home that is more energy intensive, it's the kitchen. And so the kitchen, I think, and this is not necessarily my point of view, I do think that there's a role for a kitchen. I think a home without a kitchen is not a home. Uh, but I do see this paradigm being challenged over time because of our will to be some more sustainable. When you think about all the investments up the food chain, demand chain management, the logistics, all the things we've been talking about last half hour, when you think about it, at the end of the day, the consumer will be able to rely on the food industry to get what he or she wants with minimal energy expenditure for the environment. Buildings are actually going to be thought differently, and the space as well. And so this is really one thing that I suspect will be challenged over the next several years. How do we actually support a market of consumers with no kitchen? And does it mean that people won't cook? Not necessarily. It really depends where they're going to cook. Okay, so uh, communal kitchens, for example, you could actually have in a building. You can actually have one kitchen. You can actually have ready-to-eat facilities in different places. I mean, it's just going to change. And I do think that because of the cost of real estate and everything else happening right now with housing, and you know this, housing has impacted food. In 2023, several people were spending less on food because of shelter costs. So those two elements are absolutely intertwined. And so it's hard um, to look at both food and housing in isolation. So when I see housing these days, I absolutely try to understand how housing can actually impact food and food policies overall. That's so I wanted to tackle all aspects of the food chain, but on a consumer side, this is the one thing that I suspect will be discussed more and more in years to come. And certainly, I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Again, I don't agree with it. I actually think that kitchens are going to be disappearing, but there are more and more economists that actually do believe that perhaps there'll be more home with no kitchens, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a thing, and the economy, the food economy, will adjust based on the fact there'll be more homes without kitchens. Again, I support mentors. And so I did talk a few times about my involvement with Axon. Axon is a food packaging company. I don't think I've spoken to you guys about this before, but the person you see here is Felix Chung. He's an incredible individual. He's based out of Hong Kong, and he developed a sous vide technology that allows food to be kept at room temperature safely for 2 years. So when you think about it, when you think about the cold chain, when you think about food or meat or fish, products that are transported from for thousands of miles without a cold chain, can you imagine the energy you're going to save? The limitation and when it comes to pollution and gas emissions is just incredible. And now, of course, the question that I would ask you is that would you eat a piece of meat that has been at room temperature for 2 years in this package? Well, this is how I met Felix. Felix asked me, "Well, do you want to be my mentor?" And I said, "Well, it depends." And he sent me a piece of meat from Hong Kong to my home, ate it, and I told him, if I survive, I'm your mentor. And I did survive. So there you go. And so Felix is an outstanding entrepreneur. He's getting some traction. I'm not going to get into the details in terms of who he's doing business with, but there is some movement there. And so don't be surprised if packaging becomes a key piece of how the food supply chain is becoming more sustainable over time. I know we know that the federal government is actually looking into the ban of single-use plastic for grocery stores. I think it's a must, but of course there are some concerns about options and new technologies that are required, and of course this is something that needs to be discussed more and more. The other issue, of course, is the fact that, you know, these packaging will come at a cost. I mean, are people willing to pay for these technologies? Despite the fact that food prices have gone up. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but I think everyone agrees that our addiction to plastics is just not helpful at all. So how do we actually resolve this issue? And I actually don't think it's impossible, but it will take some time. It will take some time, but over time, again, I actually do think that we'll see fewer um, non-reusable plastic packages in grocery stores, and that actually will have an impact on how supply chains are actually being managed. Again, just a bit of a plug: the Food Professor podcast. It's our podcast. My producer Michael LeBlanc and I, we actually release an episode a week for the last 4 years. It's been great. I encourage you to look up the Food Professor podcast. We actually interview a CEO pretty much every week in the food business, and lots of stories. We actually cover food news every week. There's always something going on. So Michael and I, we comment on stuff going on in the industry, whether it's in Canada or elsewhere around the world. And so our new episode actually come out every Thursday. night. So I guess that's all I have for you today. And I'm just looking at the time. Yeah, we still have a few minutes for questions. So I'll stop now, and I'll send things back to Pupa, and I'm sure he was listening in attentively the last several minutes. So Pupa, back to you.
Thank you, Sylvain, and thank you for enlightening us about those trends that are coming up in 2024. And yes, we do have time for questions. And I see one here. My apologies, I missed the solution examples for augmented human kinetic. Could you repeat that part, please? Thank you.
Well, you can always watch the video afterwards.
Yes,
Because
further on,
because
we
the video
are
will
going
be
to post
posted
it.
on your website, isn't it? Right?
Yes, yes, I was going to say that at the end, but yes, we are going to post the video at the recording of this presentation at the end. It'll be appearing on the Food Center website.
So if you don't mind, I don't want to be impolite, but if you don't mind, I don't want to waste everyone's time. So you can actually look at the video. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me.
Okay, so we move on to the next question. And unlike other countries, Canada needs to deal with environmental concerns in expanding ports, pipelines, and railroads. First Nations claims also figure prominently today. Most of other countries don't seem to have these other considerations. Do you agree?
Uh, I do. I do. I'm not overly impressed by Canada's movement. I was actually quite optimistic. I'd say probably about 15, 17 years ago, there was a lot of movement with the Gateway and Corridor Initiative. I think it was actually quite key for our country. And I was actually residing in Saskatchewan those days. And certainly, if there are provinces that would actually gain from creating this St. Lawrence River west, it would be at the prairies and BC, but there hasn't been a whole lot of investments down east. We're lucky. I mean, we're blessed by the St. Lawrence River. Everything floats on water, and that's the cheapest way to do things. But they don't have that out west. And as a result, our reputation has been damaged for a variety of reasons. So we're not efficient, and of course the food chain is not an essential service yet, and so we've seen disruptions over and over again. And frankly, when you talk to American companies, what they do, they look at the US and say maybe we should actually go elsewhere to move products, and that's not a good thing. And of course, with us, we have to north, and we have other markets, and so if we don't think big, I actually think we're missing out, and we can't really grow our ag economy. We need infrastructure and sound logistics.
Thank you. I have a question. With today's higher food prices, do you think consumers will be willing to pay more for sustainable food?
Uh, some yes, not all. I mean, sustainable food. What is sustainable food? You know what sustainable food is to me?
Mhm.
Food rescuing. Food rescue. So last week we heard about Loblaw's decision to end its 50% discount on expiring food. To me, that's sustainable food. If you actually empower consumers to rescue food and making sure that that food doesn't go to landfill, that's sustainable food to me. So you can look at how it's grown, but you can also look at how it's saved. And so both ends to me are equally as important. So I actually think that right now, when you look at both ends of the food sustainability continuum, the food rescuing part is absolutely critical. And by the way, Pupa, I'm not sure if you knew this, but with Loblaw's news last week, Flash Food, which is a food rescuing app associated with Loblaws, it saw its downloads triple last week.
Yeah,
Triple.
I didn't know
So
that. Yeah.
yeah, so there's Food Hero and Too Good to Go. And if you're looking to save some money, if you're looking at rescuing food and buy sustainable food, the very at closer to the end of their shelf life, look up some of these apps. You can save a lot of money, and you can actually make sure that a lot of food don't go to landfill as well.
Okay. Thank you. And yeah, I think that's about the questions we have, but I have a couple of questions since we have some more time. Along the same lines of food prices, you mentioned about digitalization of farming and all the technology that is involved. So do you think that that might contribute to increase in cost of food production and in return food prices going up as well? So I'm going in more in line of affordability. Do you think that might become an issue as well?
I think so. I think so. I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. There are issues there for sure, but I actually do think that at some point we'll move on from the food inflation storm. Things will get a little bit more normalized, and people will start focusing more on environmental stewardship. In fact, uh, one figure I showed during seminar number 3 was the fact that people actually still care about the environment despite food inflation. And so, compared to, say, the 2008 financial crisis, where there was a shift in terms of priorities, not this time. And so, I actually do think that that really consumers will continue to care. Now, whether or not they want to pay for it, and they can afford that, that's another issue. But overall, I actually think that the focus will remain.
Okay, thank you. And we have another question here. Are gene-edited products considered genetically modified products? How consumers' adaptability for new gene-edited products in Canada and globally?
How can consumers adapt? Is that the question?
How consumers' adaptability for new gene-edited products in Canada? So yeah, guess is I think the question might be acceptability probably, or
Well, the
embracing.
acceptability, I think we shouldn't be taking acceptability for granted. That's certainly, I think, if we did learn something from history, that's certainly something.
Yeah.
And I'm just hoping that we'll actually take some time to. So I took the time today to talk about it, and I think that, and I'm hoping that people will continue to talk about gene editing, because it's an important issue. Actually, every year, Pupa, I write my top 10 stories of the year, like in food, and gene editing was actually in my top 6 or 7. But nobody talked about it. Like, barely anybody talked about it. But to me, that was a really important decision for Canada. But that's the easy part. The approval is the easy part. The hard part is social licensing. You need to engage with the public on these issues, or else farmers are going to pay for it, and we're all going to pay for it.
No, I agree. And gene editing and genetic modification is one of my specialties, so I am expert in that area as well. So I can relate to that, and I can to follow up on.
And I'm sure
From,
you've been accused of being Frankenstein of food and
oh
things like
yeah,
that.
yeah, but
So and that's unfair.
yeah. No, I think the old GM perception was in fact because you were introducing foreign DNA, and to answer this question again, it was foreign DNA, but no, gene editing is not same as GMO. We are not inserting any foreign gene. We are just speeding up what nature does in terms of natural mutations, and that's simply put, that's what it is.
You're absolutely right. My concern is that people will confuse both,
Yeah.
you
Yeah, I
know?
think you're right. It's a question of education. And one of the things I am a proponent of is cell-free systems. I don't know if you've heard about it, is cell-free editing system, where you have all the cocktail that is needed to do the gene editing, but you're not doing it with inserting any kind of DNA to do that inside the cell.
Right.
So it's almost like you do it outside of the cell, but you're providing all the ingredients to do it. So in which
Makes
case
sense.
it becomes it's an area that is developing now, and in the next few years, I think it will pick up, and the gene editing as we know it will be superseded by this cell-free editing system.
This is the time to talk about these things and to inform the public and celebrate some of the research that is happening. I see a lot of great things going on, especially where you are in Alberta as well, in Manitoba, but nobody's talking about it, at least not in the media. So we need to celebrate some of these things because at the end of the day, consumers will win. Consumers will benefit from these innovations.
Yeah, yeah. And there's a couple more questions here. Is there a place for the small scale food processor in tomorrow's agri-food future?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yes.
Mhm.
So demand chain management allows for demand to be heterogeneous. That's the beauty. With supply side economics, it's all about growing and then you figure out a market. So when you flip things around, you actually will realize that you can actually recognize the need for small scale production, localized production as well, organic, fair trade. I can go on and on and on. Absolutely, it's the opposite, and that's what's beautiful about what's happening right now. I absolutely am excited by what's going on right now. Empowering consumers is the best thing we can do to foster more innovation.
Yep, thank you. There's one more question here. What are your latest thoughts on incidences like Buttergate? Have food manufacturers processes been humbled into behaving appropriately, seeing the consumer backlash, or do you feel you will see more instances of substitutions, food fraud, etc.?
You know, I got to tell you, and there are every day I hear things from about the industry that and the common denominator, Pupa, is the lack of transparency. We need to be transparent. And the Buttergate, I haven't gotten a question about Buttergate in a while, but Buttergate was about transparency. It was about connecting agricultural practices with the quality of food at retail, and I think everyone needs to care about the quality of food at retail as much as possible. And I mean, I'm hearing things from BC right now. Chicken farmers are trying to raise prices. They're trying to change a formula, and they're not talking to media. They're not providing any data to media. That has to change. We can't do that anymore. We need to be transparent and we need to be honest, whether it's good news or bad news. Loblaws last week was a mistake. They should have told people we're ending the 50%. And now we're hearing this week that Co-op actually made some changes to its loyalty program, and again without making an announcement to its customer base. Every day, Poopa, I'm hearing things that, my goodness, just engage with the public. Good news, bad news, you gotta tell them. You gotta tell people.
Yeah, you're right. And communication is key in
Yeah,
education,
and
of course.
sometimes it's not pleasant, but
Yeah.
might as well actually be honest, than just say, you know what, we're just gonna do it, and hopefully nobody will notice. It doesn't cut it anymore. In a demand chain management environment, it doesn't cut it anymore.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. There are no more questions. One last question from me, again, regarding this. Ottawa has now approved the gene editing CRISPR, but one thing that is still not very clarified is not clear is from approval to market. Have you had any sense about what's out there? And because that's a question we can constantly keep hearing people are interested in it. Okay, how long does it take to bring a product that is gene edited to market?
No, no, it's well. I mean, it takes a while, obviously, because you need to test and see exactly how results look like. But I mean, I don't really have a sense of timeframes, but it's coming. It's coming. So, and we're gonna see some really outstanding innovation, and at the end of the day, it will stabilize food prices. Now, people are saying, our prices are going to be cheaper. No, 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 it doesn't work that way. It will stabilize prices over time because you're stabilizing access and supplies. That's the key. Often I'm asked the question, is food inflation the enemy? It is not the enemy. High food inflation is the enemy. and high inflation actually is often supported by price volatility. We got to get rid of price volatility, and to do that, you need more innovation from farm gate to plate.
Yeah, thank you. We are just about out of time here, and thank you to you, Sylvain, for this enlightening webinar, and also to the audience. And a reminder, our next webinar number 5 will be happening March 20th, and we'll be navigating net zero carbon in agriculture. And so keep a lookout for the social media for announcement, and we'll see you in about a month's time. Thank you, Sylvain.
Take care, Fuba.
Bye.
Bye-bye.